Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we are going to be looking at something kind of interesting and a little bit different. We're only going to be using one source this time. It's this talk on self-knowledge and ego. And, when I first heard about it, I thought, okay, this could be pretty interesting. But then the speaker starts out with this question. What if, humanity's, normal state is kind of madness? Because we don't know who we are. I was like, well, hold on a second. I got to hear more about this.
Yeah, it's a pretty out there idea, right? It really makes you think. The speaker starts off with this analogy about a madman who's just wandering around this village and he keeps asking, who am I? And everyone else is like, oh, he's crazy. But the whole point of the talk is to flip that on its head. What if not knowing yourself is the actual crazy part?
So it's like everyone else is looking at this one guy and thinking he's nuts, but maybe they're all missing something really important about themselves.
Exactly. It's like that old saying about, if you're in a room full of crazy people and you're the only sane one, then you're the crazy one.
Uh-huh. I've heard that one before.
To really drive that point home, the speaker tells the story about a poisoned well. So imagine this whole village and everyone is drinking from this well, but the water is making them all delusional. So since everyone is kind of crazy in the same way, nobody can actually tell what's real anymore.
Oh, wow. I get it. So not knowing yourself is like the poison. It becomes the norm because everyone is experiencing it.
Right. The talk is saying that true health for all of us comes from self-awareness. So without that, we are all basically living a lie.
Okay, so let's talk about this whole ego thing. What exactly does that mean in this context? I feel like people throw that word around all the time.
Yeah, you hear it everywhere these days. But in this talk, the ego is this fake sense of self that we create. It's based on things outside of us, like our name or the stuff we own or our jobs and accomplishments. It's like we're always trying to define ourselves by things that can disappear at any moment.
So instead of figuring out who we are on the inside, we get caught up in all this external stuff.
Totally. And the talk actually tells this pretty funny story about this guy named Nasruddin. So this guy is super worried about waking up and not knowing who he is. So he sleeps with all his clothes on because he's afraid that if he wakes up naked, he won't know who he is without his clothes.
Uh-huh. He's letting his clothes define him. I mean, I know it's a funny story, but it kind of makes me think about how I do similar things. Like I let my job title or how busy I am define my worth. But those things can change in a heartbeat.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it this way. You know how a kid might spend hours building this awesome sandcastle on the beach? It's their pride and joy. But then the tide comes in and washes it all away. Well, the speaker is saying that clinging to those external parts of our identity is just as fleeting.
Okay, I'm starting to see how sneaky this ego can be. It tricks us into thinking it's the real us.
Yeah.
But how does it actually work? How does it manage to pull that off every single day?
So to explain that, the speaker uses this really interesting metaphor. He says the ego is like a stone that got thrown into a palace.
A stone. Okay, that sounds intriguing. What does a stone have to do with the ego?
Well, think about it. The stone can't do anything on its own. It just gets tossed around by outside forces. But it starts to believe that it's the one in control. So if it breaks a window or lands on a comfy cushion, it's like, look what I did. But really, it was just following the laws of physics.
Yeah.
You
know what? That is such a good analogy.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I catch myself doing that exact same thing. If I get lucky at work, my ego's like, yeah, that was all me. I'm so awesome.
Yeah, we've all been there, right? The talk points out how the ego is always trying to puff itself up. It loves to take all the credit when things go well. But if something bad happens, it had nothing to do with that.
So basically, the ego wants us to stay distracted and focused on all that outside stuff so we don't start questioning it.
You got it. And it does that by keeping us intoxicated.
Yeah, hold on. When you say intoxicated, you mean with drugs and alcohol?
Well, yeah, that's definitely part of it. But the talk is talking about intoxication in a much broader sense. Anything that numbs us out and keeps us from really looking at ourselves. So think about all those things we use to distract ourselves, like working all the time, or binge watching TV, or always chasing after approval from others. All that stuff is like a temporary escape from having to face ourselves.
It's true. It's so easy to fall into those traps.
Yeah.
And it feels like everywhere we look, we're being told to stay busy and achieve more. We always need to be chasing after something outside of ourselves.
And the ego loves it. That kind of environment is like a playground for the ego, because as long as we're looking outward, we're not paying attention to the emptiness it's trying to hide.
Okay, so we're basically stuck in this loop. We're always looking for validation and distractions, and it's all because of the ego. But if we're not supposed to be buying into all that, then what's the other option? Is there a way to break free from this ego trip?
Well, the talk says that the way out is through self-awareness. Instead of being controlled by the ego's wants and fears, we start to just observe them, step back a little.
So it's kind of like we can see those thoughts and urges without getting totally swept up in them.
Right. The talk uses this phrase, self-remembrance. It's about developing this inner observer who can witness our thoughts and feelings and actions without judging them or getting attached.
So it's not about like pretending those thoughts and emotions aren't there. It's more about creating some distance between ourselves and those patterns in our minds.
Yeah, exactly. And self-remembrance helps us see what the ego is up to. We start to notice when it's trying to grab the spotlight, when it's feeding off our insecurities or making us feel way more important than we actually are.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But how do we actually develop this self-remembrance? It sounds kind of tough. Like, how do you just suddenly become this super aware person?
Yeah. It's definitely a practice, not like a one-time thing. The talk doesn't give like a step-by-step guide or anything, but it does say that mindfulness is super important. Just paying attention to our breath or how our body feels or the thoughts popping into our heads. Like all that helps us become more aware.
So it's about being present in each moment, instead of just going through life on autopilot and letting the ego run the show.
Exactly. And when we become more aware, we have more choices. We can choose how we react to things instead of just following our old ego patterns.
So instead of getting all defensive when someone criticizes us or feeling jealous when someone else is successful, we can just pause and observe those feelings, without letting them control what we do.
Right. That's what self-awareness is all about. It gives us the ability to step outside of those automatic reactions and actually make choices that line up with our values and who we truly are.
This is really making me rethink my whole idea of success and happiness. It's crazy how easy it is to fall into that trap of thinking, oh, if I just get that promotion or buy that new car, then I'll finally be happy,
Yeah. Yeah. The ego loves to keep us chasing after that stuff. But the talk is saying that true fulfillment doesn't come from getting things or reaching goals. It comes from knowing ourselves.
So it's not about what we experience. It's about how we connect with those experiences.
Exactly. The talk warns us about clinging to any external marker of identity, even positive ones. True self-worth comes from inside, not from what we have or what we achieve.
Okay, so we need to find that sense of completeness within ourselves instead of always looking for it outside of ourselves. But this is what I'm still wondering about. If self-awareness is like the cure for ego intoxication, how do we actually weaken the ego's control over us?
Well, this is where the talk gets really interesting. It tells the story about an emperor who went to see this famous monk named Bodhidharma. The emperor was totally consumed by his ego, and he begged Bodhidharma to help him get rid of it.
I can imagine the emperor was pretty desperate to find a solution. I mean, who wouldn't want to be free from all that ego drama?
Yeah, totally. So Bodhidharma said he would help, but he told the emperor to come back the next morning at 4 a.m. and to bring his ego with him. The emperor was super excited, and he couldn't wait for the meeting.
Oh, I bet I can already tell this is going to be a good one.
So the next morning comes, and the emperor shows up bright and early. Bodhidharma asks him, "Where's your ego? You were supposed to bring it with you." The emperor is totally confused. He's like, "Well, it's inside of me, of course."
I could just picture the emperor's face when Bodhidharma tells him to close his eyes and point to where his ego is.
Right. The emperor starts searching everywhere, but he can't find this thing he thought was such a huge part of him. As the sun starts to come up, he finally realizes something big. His ego, this thing he'd been battling against his whole life, wasn't actually real. It was all in his head.
Wow, that's powerful. So the lesson is that you can't really get rid of the ego because it's not a physical thing. It's more like a bunch of thoughts and beliefs that we've tricked ourselves into believing are true. So we've been trying to fight something that isn't even real, like trying to catch a shadow. We've made this ego seem so powerful, but maybe it's not as big of a deal as we thought.
That's exactly what the talk is getting at. We don't have to fight the ego. We just need to understand how it works once we see it for what it is. Just a bunch of random thoughts and desires and fears. It loses its power over us.
So we just need to watch it and see through its tricks.
Yeah.
But how does that actually play out in real life? Like, how do we go from understanding this to actually being more self-aware?
The talk makes this point that self-knowledge isn't about adding something. It's about taking stuff away. It's like we were given this amazing detailed map of our inner world, but instead of following it, we just keep drawing all over it, adding our own distractions and misinterpretation.
We get so caught up in our own stories and the labels we put on ourselves that we can't see what's actually true. It's like we forgot that we drew the map in the first place, and we can change it whenever we want.
Yeah, exactly. We've been so busy making these fancy sandcastles of ego that we've completely forgotten about the ocean that's inside of us.
This deep dive has been mind-blowing. I'm really starting to see the difference between who I actually am and that stone that's been pretending to be me this whole time.
That's the first step on the path to self-awareness, realizing what game you're playing.
So what does this mean for us? How do we actually live from a place of self-awareness instead of being ruled by our egos? How do we stop getting lost in all those thoughts and emotions that keep us feeling stuck?
The talk doesn't really give any hard and fast rules or techniques, but it does say that cultivating a state of self-remembrance is super important. It's about shifting our focus from outside of us to inside of us.
So like taking some time for reflection and looking inward.
Yeah, but it goes deeper than that. It's about having that inner observer always watching our experiences without judging or getting attached. It's about noticing those thoughts and feelings without getting caught up in all the stories around them.
So instead of saying, I am angry or I am not good enough, we can just see those feelings come and go, like clouds passing by.
That's a perfect way to put it. The talk suggests that when we do this, we can see the ego's tricks more clearly. We start to notice when it's trying to take over and feed off our fears.
It's like that saying, the unexamined life is not worth living. We need to bring awareness to what's happening inside our minds.
And when we become more aware, we have more choices. We can choose how we react to things instead of just following the same old ego patterns.
So instead of letting our ego call the shots, we can make choices that actually match our values and who we really are.
The talk reminds us that this isn't some quick fix. It's a lifelong journey of discovering and transforming ourselves.
It's a journey with no finish line, just a constant unfolding.
And the rewards are huge. The talk suggests that as we free ourselves from the ego's grip, we start to experience a deep sense of freedom and peace and fulfillment.
It's like we've been wandering around lost in a maze and finally found our way back home. Well, this deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about. What was the most impactful part for you?
For me, it was realizing that self-knowledge isn't something we have to find. It's already here. We just have to uncover it, you know? It's buried under all those layers of ego and conditioning.
That's a really beautiful way to look at it. And I think that's a great takeaway for all of us. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'd like to leave you with a challenge. Why not spend some time today just watching your own ego in action? See how it tries to take over and listen to the stories it tells you about yourself. And ask yourself, what would it look like to live a life that's more grounded in self-awareness?
That's a powerful question to consider, and it could lead us to a much more fulfilling and meaningful life.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into self-knowledge and the ego. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deeper into who you truly are.
Please like, share and subscribe.